all this breaking news stuff of the bridge collapse is all Canadian. I want to get some like this is not a Canadian news story. Why am I looking at it? Let's see. What's the update on it?
Where we are getting an update from the federal government regarding the bridge collapse in Baltimore.
Missing individuals have not survived. And the Coast Guard appreciates the state of Maryland's leadership and humanity in supporting the family members of the missing. I'd like to personally thank the state and local responders for their heroic search and rescue efforts. While we didn't achieve the outcome that we had hoped for, it was a tremendous team effort in the treacherous operational conditions. As this aspect of the response shift to recovery operations and consistent with the President's direction to get the port up and running as soon as possible, the Coast Guard highest priority now is restoring the waterway for shipping, stabilizing the motor vessel dolly and removing it from the site, and coordinating a maritime casualty investigation under the leadership of the National Transportation and Safety Board. So just a couple of words on each one of those. So in terms of assessing restoring the waterway, the Coast Guard is very tightly connected to the Army Corps of Engineers as they lead in that role as the lead federal agency for that effort. As we were in the Oval Office, the President called General Spellman, the Chief of the Army Corps of Engineers, who's on site. General Spellman and I had a number of conversations yesterday in terms of the coordinated approach moving forward.
Come on,
and they're moving very aggressively and putting resources and mobilizing the necessary equipment, conducting the analysis.
Everybody works hard. Everybody was qualified. All right, let's.
In terms of continuing to stabilize the vessel, mitigating any pollution threat, and removing the vessel from the area, the vessel is stable, but it still has over 1.5 million gallons of fuel oil and lube oil on board, and it does have 4,700 cargo containers on board. 56 of those contain hazardous materials, and 2 are missing overboard. The ones that are in the water do not contain hazardous materials. And then around 13 or so on the bow of the ship were damaged as the bridge collapsed and impacted the front of that ship. So the Coast Guard has moved aggressively to board the vessel, and we have teams on board. The responsible party, the ship operator, has mobilized, activated their marine salvage plan in addition to their marine pollution response plan, both things that are required by the United States Coast Guard. The salver is a Resolve Marine Incorporated, and they have begun mobilizing resources to take the next steps appropriate to refloat the vessel and remove it from that area. The real critical thing here is that, as you know, a portion of the bridge remains on the bow of that ship, and we will be coordinating very closely with the Army Corps of Engineers and their contractors to first effect the removal of that debris before the vessel can then be removed. The vessel bow is sitting on the bottom because of the weight of that bridge debris on there, and there are underwater surveys that are happening by remotely operated vehicle. Divers will be in the water today to complete that underwater survey. There's no indication that there's any flooding or any damage underneath the waterline to that vessel, and that effort will continue, and we'll keep you informed of that. And then lastly, in terms of the casualty investigation, as the Secretary had said, this is led by the National Transportation and Safety Board. I've had a couple of conversations with Chair Hamandi on this account.
So there's
and
no damage, they say, so far in terms of the vessel
what we've done
itself.
Is we've activated
so there's like no risk of anything.
A memorandum of understanding between the Coast Guard and NTSB, and because of the multimodal and complex nature of this investigation, we will be providing Coast Guard investigators for what we call a Marine Board of Investigation, which is our highest level of investigation in the Coast Guard that will fold in and coordinate with the NTSB investigation as that moves forward. I think the Secretary closed with some top-line messages, and for us, I can tell you that our unified command, which is essentially a term that we use in the United States for how we mobilize against crises with all the appropriate federal, state, local agencies and other stakeholders. We have a tremendous amount of talent on there, and a lot of resourcing, and given the magnitude and importance of this response, it's going to be very, very aggressive moving forward, and we'll keep you informed of that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Admiral, CNN has obtained a government memo that it was sort of currently evaluating hazardous material that was contained in some of the containers on the ship. Can you update us on that investigation?
Wait, what just happened there? Did he just like go to walk off?
Thank you so much. Admiral, CNN has obtained...
And then he comes back. What the heck? Was he not ready for questions?
evaluating hazardous
was he trying to
material
avoid
that was
them?
contained in some of the containers on the ship. Can you update us on that investigation? And is there a threat to the public from any of the materials on board the ship?
There is no threat to the public from the hazardous materials on board. So we've obtained the vessel manifest that container ships carry and done the analysis of the types of hazmats that are on board. We have a very specialized hazmat team on board called the Atlantic Strike Team. We have 3 of those around the country, and we have air monitoring them there to detect if there are anything that are coming off of those containers. The majority of those containers are closer to the pilot house and are completely unaffected by the damage to the bow of the ship, and we have not determined that there's any kind of release at this time.
So what do you assess as the risk that some of those materials could leak or spill?
So most of these things are things like mineral oils, and even though they're hazardous, we've determined that there really isn't any kind of threat to the public.
And Secretary Buttigieg, for you, President Biden has said the federal government should front the full cost of reconstructing the bridge. What do the early estimates say that cost will be, and how quickly can you get that money?
We don't have dollar estimates yet, but we actually have provisions that allow us to begin releasing funding even while that is being determined. My understanding is, as we speak this afternoon, an emergency relief funding request has come in from the Maryland State DOT. We'll be processing that immediately to start getting them what they need. Also, later today, there will be a design and procurement-oriented meeting that we'll participate in, our Federal Highway Administration, along with MDOT. Again, obviously, it's early days, but now is the time to begin scoping that out so that they can get to work.
Thank you. Related to that, Mr. Secretary, how much existing money is there now within DOT coffers to handle requests such as the one from MDOT? Do you have funding through the Federal Highway Administration, through the infrastructure law, or when do you anticipate having to go to Congress for potentially a supplemental request on the bridge costs?
So the infrastructure law did
That's like who's paying for it right now.
authorize funding into the emergency relief account, which is the mechanism that is most likely to come into play here. Last I checked, there was about $950 million available, but also a long line of needs and projects behind that. So it is certainly possible. I would go so far as to say likely that we may be turning to Congress in order to help top up those funds, but that shouldn't be a barrier to the immediate.
Oh my god, I gotta share this. This is hilarious. I made a joke, ships can't melt steel beams. And this guy is like so mad. Shortly. I just...
next few days beginning to get the ball rolling.
What would be the time frame in sending that request?
I think it's too soon to know the mechanics of that.
And for the Vice Admiral, can you discuss broadly just the safety of maritime shipping in general and kind of the strength of the regulations that govern it, and particularly the inherent international nature of the maritime business could potentially create issues, especially if you have ships based in different countries with potentially weaker regulations?
Oh, and I want to say, they're dipping into an emergency fund, basically, to help build the bridge back. Hopefully the company that smashed into the bridge is fined like out the wazoo.
Yeah, absolutely. So despite what happened 36 hours ago in Baltimore, the maritime mode of transportation, merchant shipping, is an incredibly safe mode of transportation, not just here in the United States, but worldwide. While we do have a regime of regulations that are just comprehensive in terms of the vessel conditions, the cargo that they carry and how they do that, the qualifications and certifications from the mariners who operate these ships, those are actually networked with a global set of regulations that we negotiate and uphold through the International Maritime Organization in London. So this ship was flagged by Singapore. That was the flag state administration, and I spoke with the administration in Singapore just a few hours ago. They'll be participating in the investigation. We do something called flag state examinations to ensure that even though these are not U.S. flag vessels coming in, we do an inspection to assure that they meet the high international and domestic standards that we demand.
Secretary Buttigieg, I know that you said the rebuilding efforts are just beginning, but when it comes to the actual port, can you give us a sense of what the timeline would be for reopening? Is it days? Is it weeks? Is it months? And same for the bridge. Are we talking about weeks, months? Are we talking about years?
Too soon to be certain. What I'll say in the case of the bridge is that the original bridge took 5 years to construct. That does not necessarily mean it will take 5 years to replace, but that tells you what went into that original structure going up. Again, we need to get a sense of the conditions of the parts that look okay to the naked eye, but we just don't know yet, especially in terms of their foundational infrastructure. So it is going to be some time where commuters are going to need to depend on that 95 and 895 tunnel, and it's going to put pressure on them. As far as the port, again, too soon to venture an estimate. The vast majority of the port is inside of that bridge, which means most of it cannot operate, although there is a facility at what's called Sparrows Point that can handle some amount of cargo shipping, but nothing close to the totality of Baltimore.
And for the port workers, you mentioned there's going to be an economic cost, but also incurred to them, I'm sure. Any of the funding that you're talking about in terms of emergency funding, would that cover them as well?
This is a major concern. The President has directed the administration to find any and all resources that could come into play here. I don't know this to be an automatic eligibility for the emergency relief funding that I mentioned earlier, but we're going to turn over every stone we have, and of course beyond DOT, there may be other resources that come into play.
And sorry, just one more quickly. Have you been in any communication with the owners of this vessel in terms of them paying some kind of consequence here?
I have not. I'd really defer to NTSB and law enforcement for that.
Mr. Secretary, do you envision that this would be constructing a very different bridge going forward? You referenced the 1970 state of affairs then. Do you believe it would be an entirely new span, and would you envision different safety mechanisms as you are assessing this at this point?
I can't speculate on that. What I will note is that some of the other bridge collapses that were of these proportions, notably the Minnesota bridge collapse, happened because of a design flaw and the bridge spontaneously collapsed. This is, of course, not that. This was the result of an impact. But we don't yet know what NTSB will find or how that might inform plans going forward.
And based on what you've seen so far, do you recommend that any other other spans take any steps based on what we've learned about however remarkably unusual it was for that impact? Do you think there need to be different steps to protect other spans going forward?
Some modern bridges around the world, especially after the 1980 Tampa incident, have been designed with different features to mitigate impacts and protect their piers. Right now, I think there's a lot of debate taking place among the engineering community about whether any of those features could have had any role in a situation like this. Again, it's difficult to overstate the impact of this collision we're talking about. It's not just as big as a building, it's really as big as a block. 100,000 tons all going into this pier all at once. But one other thing I would add, more broadly speaking, is that the President's infrastructure package has the first ever dedicated federal fund for resilience. Largely that's been construed in terms of seismic resilience and resilience in the face of extreme weather events, but certainly something we'll be looking at going forward, knowing what we've experienced in Baltimore.
And lastly, the status of the crew of the cargo ship, maybe the Vice Admiral is better suited for that. Are they still on board, and are they fully cooperating with what you need?
The crew is cooperating with what we need. They remain on board, and predominantly an Indian crew with one.
Wait, what? No way. They're still on the ship? That's literally what he just said, isn't it?
What we need. They remain on board.
They remain on board.
Predominantly an Indian crew with one Sri Lankan crew member on board, but they're still there and very much engaged in the dialogue and the investigation.
Okay, we've been hearing from the Vice Admiral as well as the U.S. Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg, giving an update on the Francis Scott Key Bridge collapse in Baltimore. That's been almost 36 hours now, where the missing are presumed deceased. When it comes to a timeline for the port reopening.
So everybody who's missing is dead. They're of course, they're going to be dipping into emergency funds to fix this up, which they're going to need to get it going right away. The crew is still on board the ship. I guess they have to be. They're probably not really authorized to, unless the ship is stable. That's another thing too, that it's not damaged in any way that it would sink. Yeah, that's I don't know.